Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really excited to welcome you to today's webinar. I'm Kristen Fontecero from the University of Michigan School of Information. And on behalf of the school, the Library of Michigan, and LSTA funding, thanks to the Institute of Museum and Library Services, I am just tickled as can be to welcome Mega today to lead today's presentation. Those of you who have not had the joy of working with Mega Subramaniam before, of all the people who should tongue twist over names, it's Fontecero. And she has done such exceptional work about the ways in which youth interact with people, information, and technology. And today she'll be using design thinking as a way of working through this issue of underserved voices. So again, we are made possible in part by the School of Information at the University of Michigan, the Library of Michigan, and the Institute of Museum and Library Services as a monthly series to take a look at issues that our top thinkers are considering, that are on the edge of what's new and current. Well, I'll turn it over to Mega. And for those who ask, today's webinar will be archived and you will receive an email. It's usually within 48 hours. And also there is a chat feature in the, you'll either see it on your toolbar, an icon with a word balloon for chat, or you can, it might be in the lower right control panel, depending on what computer you're on. And we encourage you to use this. It's a nice cozy group today to share your questions, share your ideas, so that we all walk out of here with a really rich set of new skills. So I'm delighted to welcome Mega here. I'm a big fan of hers, and I can't wait to hear how this unfolds.
Thank you so much, Kristen. Well, hello, Michigan, and folks from other states that are joining us today. I hope, first of all, I hope everyone is doing well, staying healthy, washing their hands at least 20 seconds every now and then. And I hope, everyone's family is also doing well. So today, I will actually be talking about how we can inspire, ideate, and iterate programs and services and space and systems with your community. Um, and when I talk about inspire, ideate, and iterate, these are stages of design thinking, which I'm going to get into detail after this. And I'm going to talk to you about how you can obtain voices of your community using specific techniques that are associated with the stages in design thinking. I'm not monitoring the chat while I'm presenting, so I'm hoping that Kristen is. And Kristen, feel free to interrupt me anytime if you have some burning questions that needs to be answered while I'm presenting. There will be time at the end as well for Q&A. So before we dive into the actual webinar and the content today, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. So I teach in the Masters in Library and Information Science program at the College of Information Studies, also known as the iSchool at the University of Maryland. And at the iSchool at Maryland, I teach courses in the youth experience specialization and school library specializations. And I also teach courses in our PhD program. My broad research agenda is to investigate how underserved and disadvantaged young adults use libraries for the development of emerging digital literacy skills that are essential for STEM learning. And then also how libraries can play a role in developing and sustaining young adults' interest in STEM. So to achieve this broad goal, my research breaks into two threads. One is I work directly with young adults to leverage the strengths in the library by creating learning environments that help them develop digital literacy skills and increase their STEM interests. So for example, in an after-school program, in school libraries, in the DC public school systems that I did a couple of years ago, I leveraged the interest in youth in science fiction and science-infused movies. And then I also leveraged librarians' knowledge of the science fiction, and also the science infused movies. And then I brought the librarians and the youth together to encourage youth to produce science stories in various formats that build their interests in STEM. The second thread of my research is I work directly with librarians, library staff, to enhance their abilities and skills to facilitate digital literacy and STEM learning in libraries. So essentially in the second thread, I bring research and practice together to enhance the skills of in-service and pre-service youth and school librarians. So one example that I can give on how I do this is the youth experience specialization that I've developed with my colleagues at the iSchool, and we also tapped some of my colleagues at the College of Education here at Maryland. And what we did is that we are training librarians to facilitate learning with technology and teach them methods for engaging youth as co-designers of youth library programs through the use of design thinking. So design thinking is actually evident in both of the threads that I mentioned earlier. So it's kind of like I feel like I sort of uh, eat and breathe design thinking. So just to give you outline of my talk today, I'm going to begin the talk today by briefly defining design thinking. I'm not going to go into too detail. And in the interest of time, I'll show you two programs, two library programs where design thinking is in action. One is actually spearheaded by a school librarian, so it's actually happening in a school district. And then the other one is initiated by a youth service librarian at public library. So I thought, well, I'll share you sort of examples first. And then as I present these examples, I will walk you through a complete cycle of the design thinking process. And then I'll share, after I've shared those two examples, I'll share additional techniques for the process of ideation and inspiration. Again, I don't have that much of time to present all the possible techniques. I typically do this type of training or workshop kind of worth of days of activities for folks to master the techniques. So I'm only spending about an hour, maybe even less than an hour today with you all. So I'm going to try as much as possible to cover as many techniques as I can. And then I'm going to share with you multiple types of design challenges so that you can start to ponder upon what will be the design challenge that you would like to take on. And then we will end with why should we even bother to do this, right? Why should we ideate and iterate with the community? Why obtain community voice after all? Why invest this time? And then we will wrap up with some key takeaways and then end with a Q&A. So first of all, I want to give a shout out to folks in IDEO who created this super well done toolkit. I provided a link to the toolkit here at the end of the slide, which you can refer either during this webinar or after this webinar. This was developed through the funds from the Global Libraries Program, uh, which was provided by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So a lot of my sharing today are based on the work that they have done for the toolkit. So this toolkit is specifically for libraries, design thinking for libraries. But let me tell you one thing, libraries are really late to the party, actually, when it comes to design thinking, because we've been kind of stuck on this expert model of delivery, right? We have to be an expert on something that we want to offer, some services, some programs that we want to offer. But businesses and for-profit education know that patrons will only pay for their service if it meets their needs, hence have embraced the approach of design thinking for decades. So we actually learn a lot from what they've done well, what they've not, what they have done not so well. We are able to learn from them. So design thinking is both an approach and a mindset. It's a mindset because you start viewing the world like a designer. You embrace ambiguity, you embrace the unknown, and you also view problems as a challenge. opportunities to transform your work and create innovations. Design thinking is also an approach, and that is what I'm going to mostly talk to you about today. They are related, right? As if you think about it, as you master the approach, you tend to think as a designer, hence you then develop the mindset. So there are three phases to keep in mind in design thinking. While IDEO presents them as phases, but they are by no means are they sequential or linear, because designers kind of go back and forth between these phases. So the first stage is inspiration. So inspiration is about framing a design challenge and discovering new perspectives on the opportunity. So one of my favorite examples is actually I drew this from the toolkit. It's kind of an example that's very simple to understand and everybody sort of connects with this, which is a classroom teacher example. So how a classroom teacher who's working with elementary school children, he's thinking about how might we design a classroom to better meet students' need. So this might stem from a classroom teacher seeing that regardless how beautiful are things on his bulletin board that he puts on, the kids never engage with the content. He sees them like, just walking through it, passing through it, just not engaging with the content. So here the teacher has a challenge. So I have a challenge. So ideation is about generating ideas and making them tangible. So while interviewing the students, the teacher found that the students cannot actually see the content on the bulletin boards. So what he did, he simply just lowered the bulletin boards so that students can actually see it, and it worked, right? After making the simple adjustment, his students are more engaged, move more fluidly in the classroom space. So I've learned something. The third stage, which we call as iteration, is about continual experimentation based on user feedback. So the teacher now consistently engages students in helping him more effectively shape the learning experience in the entire classroom. So based on the continuous feedback, he's now creating semi-private space for the children to congregate around the bulletin board, chat about the content, and doing so many things that have real impact on the engagement with the content that he's intending them to have. So again, I have presented this as phases, but keep in mind that they are not linear. So let's work through some examples of design thinking. So first example I'm going to share with you is a program that has been created using the design thinking approach that's run in a school library, but was developed by a youth service librarian in a public library. So this was something that they were working together. So I want to say here that you will see a lot of my examples are very youth focused, and that's because I just told you who I am. I work a lot with youth, but later on, you will see that these techniques can be adapted for any age group. And I constantly work with the state of Maryland, the library staff at Maryland, and not all of them work with youth, right? So I've used these techniques with other age groups. It just requires you to be adaptable. So going back to this example, my student who is a youth services librarian from Kenosha Public Library in Kenosha, Wisconsin, Heather Thompson, who was also one of the Library Journal's movers and shakers this past year. So she developed this program called So Gadgets Sewable Circuits Mini Camp. It's a mouthful. It was an after school program designed for third and fifth graders that took place for 2 hours per day for 4 consecutive days. So in this program, the kids learned the basic of hand sewing, how electricity flows through a circuit, and then apply this knowledge to designing and creating a project that uses conductive thread, fabric, batteries, and LEDs. So this program was led by Heather in collaboration with Brass Community School in Kenosha. So what we're going to do now is going to backtrack and let me tell you how Heather came up with this idea for this program. So there are many challenges that Heather encountered that inspired this project. But for the interest of the time, I'm going to just share with you one challenge and walk you through how Heather used design thinking to approach this. All right. So we begin with I have a challenge. I just shared with you the stages. So this is the first stage. So the school already has a maker space. That's one thing that Heather was paying attention to. So the challenge that she came up with is what facilitation and resources do we need to have in our makerspace that will allow children from Brass Community School, also known as BCS, to make something that they like, right? She wanted to utilize their makerspace, and this was her challenge question. So she has a challenge. So inspiration stage. So the inspiration stage is about listening, observing, and being open to the unexpected. So in the inspiration stage in design thinking, we have to actively explore. So to get inspired, there are many approaches that one can take. So Heather actually decided to conduct brief one-to-one interviews with some kids that she knows in the school, just to generate ideas on what they like to make and why. And for example, she asked them uh, what what they would like to do, what they would like to bake. If you could make one thing, what would it be, right? So she asked a couple of kids. So I'm just going to summarize two of the kids that she talked to. So first, meet Henry, that you can see in the screen. Um, so my name is Henry. I'm in fourth grade. I am an Arduino junkie. And for those of you who are not familiar with Arduino, Arduino is an open source electronic platform to create interactive electronic objects. And I can explain more later what that is if you're interested. So going back to Henry. So Henry admits he is an Arduino junkie. And I love complex math and I love to code. I know everything there's to know about circuits and I like working with other kids. And he says, I want to make clothes that when you touch it, it would connect directly to your brain so you can see things that aren't really there, like augmented reality. So Henry is obviously an Elon Musk, I think, in making, right? So this is one of the kids that she talked to. And then meet Margaret. So Margaret is in fifth grade, and she says, I love to sew and am totally into e-textiles. It sounds like I get to sew. And when Heather actually got to Margaret, she's been hearing a lot about kids want to make things and want to make clothes. So she kind of started throwing this idea about e-textiles to Margaret. So that's why Margaret is using this term. So going back to what she said, it sounds like I get to sew. I like working with other kids. I think it would be fun to make a glow in the dark hat. So now that Heather knows that e-textiles are particularly interesting for this age group, she started focusing on trying to figure out how she could run sort of an e-textile session in the makerspace, right? So this is where we get into the ideation space. And specifically, what she wants to know is what facilitation and resources are needed to run an East textile focused maker spaces. So she utilized this approach called big paper approach. And she began the design session or with this big paper approach with 4 children, different from the ones that she interviewed earlier. So what she did, she described the basics of e-textiles to them so they understand what this possible program is going to look like and so that they know there'll be fabric, there'll be batteries, there'll be conductive thread, right? So she's trying to figure out, most importantly, she's trying to figure out, going back to her challenge question, if you guys remember, she's trying to figure out the facilitation, right? What prompt she should be giving, also what resources they will need. She really did not want them to be concerned about the feasibility of what they want to make or the exact mechanics of how it will work. So she asked them to ideate what they want to make, right? Regardless how difficult it is, or whether it's feasible or not. So as you will see from what I'm going to share, you see a lot of cat design came up. And the kids were really focused on decorative items with cat themes. So on your right, you will see a design centered heavily around cats. Those are all pictures of cats, by the way. And in this picture, you can see Grumpy Cat light up shirts. You can see light up cat angel rings. You can see red, as in the color red, cat's eye necklaces. You can see a cat toy. This is like a game for you to find all those things while I'm talking. A decorative light up brooch. Oh my God, so many cat stuff on this kid's big paper design, right? On the left side, you can see another kid did a decorative sparkly t-shirt. Can you see that? But made the point that the e-textile pleats need to be attached via a Velcro so that the t-shirt can go into the washing machine and will not destroy whatever the e-textile piece that they have created. So the big ideas that emerged from this process of ideation with the children were decorative e-textiles, and the things that they want to do needs to be washable, meaning it can be separated, and you can throw the thing into a washing machine without destroying the e-textile part. It also appears that what they want to make is highly driven by interest. And here you can see interest in cats, but it could be interest in anything, right? And there was a lot of focus on bling bling, right? So they wanted things to light up. They love the bling piece of it. So from this information, Heather started ideating what are the resources that she needed, right? She realized that she needs to have Velcro, safety pins. She made all this list. She also knows that something that light up is pretty popular, so she made sure there were light bulbs, light up pennants. She also knew the content and the skills that she needs to have prior to letting the kids loose to make. And this was something really, really important to Heather. And remember, I had talked a little bit about being expert on everything, right? This is something that she was also trying to figure out. What are the skills that she needs to have, right? So that she can help them make what they want to a certain extent, and then kind of let them loose after that. So to close the loop on this example, the iteration stage, right? So she offered the first version of the program. Kids learn the basics of hand sewing, how electricity flows through the circuit, and how to apply this to design and create a project that uses conductive thread, batteries, LEDs, and all that. So the picture that you see on the left is the Rebel Alliance symbol from Star Wars. This kid was making it into a little pillow. So then, she can just pull the Velcro off, toss the pillow. Picture on the left is this Rebel Alliance symbol. Picture on the right is an emoji. So you can use your imagination to guess what that emoji is. I'm still trying to figure it out. So when I asked Heather, she said this is a prototype of a first iteration of the program, right? And she was doing this, as she was doing this, she came upon another design challenge, which was kids were scrambling to finish. Some started crying because they wanted to finish it during the time, but they just got carried away. They couldn't really finish it. So then Heather very quickly came up with the next design challenge of the next iteration of the program is how might we provide facilitation to allow the children to finish their projects during the stipulated program time, or how might we prepare children to finish their projects themselves in the library. So that was my first example. Let's see how we're doing in time. I want to move a little bit faster since I am kind of running slow. So the second example is a completely different context. So the Governor Mifflin School District in Pennsylvania received the Libraries Ready to Code grant offered by Google a couple of years back to allow students the opportunity to participate in observation and data collection about the feeding habits of birds that remain in Pennsylvania over the winter. So there are 6 bird feeders placed in 4 elementary schools for this purpose. They got a grant to buy all this. The overarching goal is for students to develop computational thinking skills, which I'm not going to go into what that is. Um, and students in grade 7 to 12. So there were about 20 to 22 kids from one middle school and one high school. Took students in grade 1 through 4, 24 kids from 4 elementary schools under their wings to research local bird habits and collect data about their winter feeding habits and to be citizen scientists. So the older kids were tasked to create the technology that's needed for the younger kids to be able to be successful citizen scientists. Hence, the older kids use the design thinking phase to inspire, ideate, and iterate the technology that they would be designing for the younger kids so that the younger kids can learn about birds, collect the data about the birds. So the school librarian in the high school managed this entire project, and I can only salute her because this was incredibly intense. So in terms of the challenge, the inspiration stage, what type of technologies can the older kids identify and create that will allow the younger kids to become citizen scientists? Um, so here you see that they did what we call as contextual interviews. This is called contextual interviews because there's already a context for this. Unlike Heather, who was kind of really sort of going with the idea to find out what kids are interested in. These kids, on the other hand, the older kids had a challenge already in place, which is they want to develop the technology for the kids, for the younger kids to be citizen scientists. So they did what we call as contextual interviews, asking very specific question to the kids, translating wonderings that the kids have into needs that can be addressed with the current technology. So these older students were actually trained by their gifted and talented teacher, gifted and talented program that they have. So they have a teacher there that's called gifted and talented teacher. And the teacher actually trained these older students on the design thinking process. Um, and here is another picture of how we can see that this actually worked. This is actually a video here, but I can't really show this video. But if you listen to this kid, I'm going to tell you what this kid will actually say. This kid will actually, when this older kid was asking her, she said one of her biggest concern is that, she loves to do this project, but she doesn't want to go out during the winter in Pennsylvania and actually look at the birds and kind of do the collection of the data. She really wants this somehow they can observe it in their iPad, right, that they have in their classroom. Um, so oops. So using what they have said during the contextual interviews, the older kids then brought back their notes to the library and started building themes. So there are 3 main themes that came out of this conversation. The need for motion sensors to capture pictures at various sites where the bird feeders are placed. So, which means that the most motion sensor here is connected to a camera, and this was all done through the use of Raspberry Pi. So that then it's connected to their it feeds into the iPads that the kids have. So the kids don't really have to go outside. The moment there's a bird that lands, right, the picture is snapped and then the picture is sent to the kids. So that was the first thing that they came up with the kids through the ideation process. The second is the need to know what birds that they're actually seeing. They realize during this contextual interviews, the kids want to see birds and identify it, but they don't really know what those birds are. So they decided to build a game this older kids that gamifies the process of learning about birds and types of birds. I think it was build a bird house and get more birds to come, and then once you get certain level, you get more birds and you identify the birds. Also a need for a website that serves as a landing page for the project. It has a Twitter feed of the bird houses, have a live feed of the bird feeder. And once these products were developed, the oldest students showed what they have done to the younger students to get more feedback and further ideate through what we call as gallery walk. So you can see the picture of them moving from one station to another station and providing ideas to the older kids. Here's a screenshot of the game. It's uh, and this was part of the ideation process as well and iteration. So they iterated this game. One thing that they run into as a challenge here is that it's really sometimes hard to get FaceTime between the older kids and the younger kids. And they were trying to do this through the teachers, but they worked with what they have there and they ideated and iterated constantly. Okay, so I shared with you two examples of design thinking, and I shared with you some techniques to use in the stages, right? So I've shared with you interviews, contextual interviews as inspirational techniques. You can also try focus groups and observation. A lot of these techniques are also in the IDEO toolkit. The IDEO toolkit is not specific to youth services, so there's more techniques there that you can see. For ideation and iteration stages, I shared gallery walk and also the big paper approach with you earlier. But here are a few more ideation and iteration techniques for you to adapt and use. Again, I have mentioned earlier, although these techniques are used with children, I personally have adapted and used these techniques with people of all ages. So the first technique, other than the ones that I've shared with you earlier, that I want to share with you today is what we call as bags of stuff. So the formal name for this brainstorming technique, which comes from a Scandinavian research actually. The formal name is called low tech prototyping, but we fondly refer to this as bags of stuff, like you see what their young girl there is carrying. With the primary goal of creating multiple solutions to an early stage design problem, kids are given bags of stuff and they form small groups. The problem is presented first to the large group, and then each of the small group receives a bag of stuff. The bag of stuff, which normally has like arts and craft materials such as construction paper, crayons, glue, tape, scissors, yarn, cotton balls, and then it has like found objects, like styrofoam packing stuff, or Lego pieces, small boxes, right? So depending on the nature of the problem, you can give them appropriate three-dimensional materials. So for example, you can give matchboxes to present computers or bells. If you're asking them maybe to design a computer space, computer lab space, right? Or you can give them noisemakers to represent auditory objects for an audio project, right? So basically you can make things up, whatever that you can put in the bags of stuff, um, uh, depending on what the design problem is. So using the materials provided in the bag, each small group will brainstorm a solution to the problem, and they will design low-tech prototypes of this solution. Because it's low-tech, right? And sometimes you can't really make up from the actual design what the design is, right? So we encourage librarians, library staff to serve as facilitators. So you have to pay attention to the verbal conversations that are happening in the small group and take written notes on these conversations to ensure that the discussions and elaboration of the solutions are not lost in the representation of the artifact and the solution that is produced. We do ask that after each group is done, they also present their ideas. So that's where we get more verbal explanation about their design. And we also normally have like a lead facilitator that will take notes on the major ideas that emerged. And then we also kind of we actually summarize those ideas. We summarize them as like what is most surprising, what is most repeated, and what is the one that kind of like gets that wow reaction from everyone. And we document that on the whiteboard. So I want to show you this bags of stuff, design that I did with some library staff in Southern Maryland who were really excited because they're going to get like a new building, and they wanted to design some of their spaces, right? So this is where I said when you look at their actual prototype, right, it needs to be accompanied by verbal presentation, because you yourself, when you look at this, you can maybe probably figure out what it is, but it needs to be attached with verbal presentations, and also um, so also the notes that are being taken, right? But this really gives them tactile to represent the idea. So then just talking about it rather than drawing it, this makes things really sort of tangible. The other approach, which I've already talked earlier, the big paper approach, I want to stress this again because this is one of the quite common approach that's being used more and more these days. But there are some pieces of techniques that I want you to be aware of. So it's essentially, this is two-dimensional, right? Compared to the bags of stuff, which was three-dimensional. This is a two-dimensional brainstorming technique that allows team of people to collaboratively work on one idea using a large piece of paper that's either placed on the floor or on a table. Instead of using small sheets of paper, brainstorming using large sheets of paper allow people to gather around one workspace, providing it gives a sense of everyone having an equal voice in the generation of ideas. So to facilitate discussion, I typically divide the large sheet of paper into three sections: what, why, and how. And you can give those prompts specifically: what, why, and how. And in the youth services world that I have worked with, youth librarians typically use this technique when they're trying to design an entire arc of programming that they would like to afford for an extended period of time, right? So uh, if you take the science fiction example that I gave earlier, you can ask the question, what other science-infused movies and fiction are you guys reading now? And why, right? Why this were your selection? And then that's where you can ask the question, how would you like to see programs that reflect some of these things that you're reading or you are watching? And you can use that for gaming, sports, fashion design, whatever, and allow the teens to come up with their own ideas of programming. The next technique I want to share with you, and I have one more, which is sticky noting. This is interesting because when we started using sticky noting with kids 13 years ago, this was really sort of innovation, right? But now people use this all the time. But it sort of makes me tickle a bit because I sometimes have issues on how people use it, especially for design session. So let me tell you how we use it here to engage or get community voices. It's simple. It's a very simple ideation and iteration technique, but it tells you a lot of things. So in designing programs, or if you're designing specific technology for your library, um, typically, people can use sticky noting to evaluate an existing technology or program, or critique a program that is under development. So you can present a program for them and ask them to critique using the sticky note. So for the sticky note, we just need sticky notes, and we need pen or pencils for them to write on the sticky notes. So people can write their likes and dislikes, or surprises that they see or hear, or design ideas on the sticky note. So the rule of thumb to remember in the execution of this technique, that each like, dislike, surprise, or design idea must be written on a separate sticky note. Because then, as sticky notes are gathered, right, you can start putting them on the board like you see on this picture here, and then start creating themes. themes that emerge, right? So you can see that a lot of people are thinking about the same thing, and then you can create themes on that. And then we actually invite the whole group after that to come out together to discuss and review the themes that emerge. So this results kind of an informal frequency analysis that represent the voices of the people that are in the room, which points to a fertile direction of the next iteration of the program or the service or the space. Last technique, layered elaboration. So this is where researchers have indicated that youth are oftentimes uncomfortable messing with other people's idea, especially if the idea was given by someone that's an adult. And I actually have noticed that even some adults are uncomfortable ruining other people's ideas. So even though we are like doing low tech prototypes and all that, people are very sensitive. They don't want to change other people's ideas sometimes. I know different people have different style. So we actually came up with this. There are some folks at the University of Maryland that came up with this technique. I personally did not come up with this technique. I just use it. So this is what we call as layered elaboration technique, which allows designers to elaborate on one's idea by changing, extending, adding, eliminating ideas of others without killing the original idea, right? So we do this first, bringing everyone in a whole group. They are provided with a base design. They are provided with a base design, and then break them into small groups. Teens sketch their designs using permanent markers or on plain white papers. We attach it to a clipboard, right? So the first group kind of add their idea on like paper. And then what we then do is pass that clipboard around, but we layer it with a transparency. So you guys still remember those transparencies? They are still useful. Um, they layer that, and then the next group takes it and then put their ideas on top, right? So we do this, maybe we pass it around 3 or 4 groups. And then what we do in between is that every time before it's passed, we ask each group to present like 5 minutes very quickly what they did to the previous design, right? And then we have a final debrief meeting um, where we capture sort of the big ideas that came out. Here's another example how that looks like, right? When you layer the transparency, you can also look for things like hot topics or hot spots that there's a lot of activity in one area that people are caring about, right? So you can use this for a lot of things like design of space. In here I think we just used it for a design of an app. So I'm curious because I have shared a few techniques with you. I was curious to know what was your favorite technique and why. So if you can type that in the chat in like 5 minutes or so, I'll get to it. I want to finish the rest of the content, but I want to just pause a minute, pause maybe about 10 seconds, not a minute, and ask you what was your favorite technique and why. All right, Kristen, I will be done in 7 minutes, I promise. So I want to go back. So now that I presented all these techniques to you, I want to make sure that we get back to this whole concept of using design thinking. So design thinking can be used to tackle any challenges that you all face in the library. The most important thing is to have that challenge question in hand. So the ideal resource, recommends that one can create what they call as how might we questions, which is why I sort of phrased those how might we earlier, right? For the Kenosha Public Library example and the Governor Mifflin School District. So I took some of their ideal questions and then I adapted it a bit to give you some examples. So here you can see if you're thinking about programs, um, You can write a how might we question that's specific to your community. So how might we engage the entire Ann Arbor community to support emerging digital literacy programs for underserved young adults in the region? How can we design a game-based learning program that encourages preschoolers to develop privacy literacy to protect the privacy of their personal information? In terms of services, how might we create a user-friendly library that brings the library to you, as into the patrons, wherever they are, that's on par with university students' digital practices, right? So this is, if you're in an academic library, this might be appealing to you. How might we provide technical assistance to members of your community who have disabilities, especially those members who are reluctant to ask for your help? So these are design thinking questions in terms of services. In terms of spaces, how might we create a hanging out, messing around, and geeking out library environment that encourages young people to produce and create information and media? How might we take advantage of unused space or redistribute space so that patrons can discover more of what the library has to offer? In terms of system, how might we design productive, mutually beneficial partnerships with local schools, local businesses, other types of libraries, and other educational institutions? So this looks at systems as a very much sort of an ecological approach. How might we redesign library assessments so that our stakeholders understand the value and impact of the library in digital literacy development in our community? So these are very high level questions when it comes to system. So why obtain community voice, right? Why do all this work? Let me tell you, if you have not noticed so far, there's a lot of empathy in this process, right? You're basically asking people what they need, what they feel. So empathizing allows discovery of feelings and the needs of the people that you are designing for. And that makes your programs, your spaces, your services, your systems all are designed with the user in mind and with their input and their voice. Secondly, I wanted to share that landscape of learning, landscape of technology, the whole landscape of how people use libraries is rapidly changing, right? So design thinking allows you to obtain community voices to offer programs, services, spaces, and systems that meet these changing needs. And sometimes it's you cannot guess these changes. You cannot really um, imagine this, right? So getting their voice to tell you what that is, what that change is, what that need is really important. And this is my favorite reason. It's really a scientific method, but inherently humanistic, right? Because you're getting feedback from actual people. And it provides data on what your community wants that you can actually share with your supervisors, that you're not offering something that your community does not need. This is what they need, and are able to tell them this because you have that data to show it to them, right? Um, so key takeaways. Um, we are no longer the expert, no have the pressure to be asked to be the expert figuring out all these things by ourselves. We can ask our community what they want and how they want it using the design thinking approach. Important takeaway: techniques presented today can and should be adapted. You know your community the best, so this, feel free to adapt it, do whatever that you like. And I will share later some resources that I think I can share to Christine so she can put this together when she puts this webinar online. I'll also share some resources that has more techniques that you can use. again, these techniques are meant to provide you quick and easy way to know what your community wants. It really doesn't take much of time to do this. A lot of people think it's really sort of difficult. You have to do kind of very elaborate data collection. Hey, this is something that, my student Heather did this really sort of quick interviews. She just stopped kids and she asked them, right? So uh, these are things that you can do according to the time that you have. You can scale it to the level of time and budget and resources that you have. And with that, I want to thank these two librarians who gave me those examples who I worked with actually through different projects. I want to thank my previous student, Christy Kodama, who helped me put together this presentation, and IDEO for giving me brilliant ideas. So, questions?
So while other people are thinking, I have one that came up earlier. This was when you were showing the photo of sticky notes.
Mm-hmm.
Someone asked, have you ever used electronic whiteboards that users can scribble on at the same time online? Does the
Mm-hmm.
physical paper make a difference?
So one of the things that fascinating question, because I'm about to um, transform a face-to-face workshop on design thinking to a completely online workshop where we were supposed to do all the sticky noting and everything in person. Now we have to transfer everything because this conference is supposed to be in Sweden, and now the Swedish authorities have said no conferences, no big gatherings, right? So I have to say that I have tried doing some of these techniques online. With the sticky notes, I think we have used Padlet to post some of the sticky notes. One of the things that we notice, people, it's quite difficult sometimes to engage people to do this online, primarily because they are not really seeing who is putting the sticky notes, right? Like they see other people writing the sticky notes, like next to them. They seem to be motivated to put those to put their thoughts on the sticky notes. Um, it seems like when they're online, this has been my observation so far, is that they're more comfortable talking about it and not so much putting things on sticky notes. So this is a whole can of research that someone that I know is trying to do, is that how do we translate this type of engagement into online type of opportunities? And I guess we'll try some of these techniques when we do this workshop in Sweden, online to some of the folks all around the world in 2 weeks. But I have to admit that some of these techniques are quite difficult to transfer when it's done online.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I see students, former students of ours on the list of attendees, and there's something about not being limited to the size of a screen,
Mhm.
but being able to spread your sticky notes over an 8-foot wall, for example,
Yeah.
that just makes the thinking more expansive. And there is something about looking at, like, why is one of my colleagues stuck way at one end? What are they doing that's so interesting? And my grad students used to say all the time, we used to call them affinity walls or affinity diagrams,
Hmm.
and they would say all the time, can't we do this online? And online just loses something. But I like your idea of Padlet. Other questions for Mega? Aha, so Laura's saying that because she works in an all digital library.
Ah,
Well, then that
okay.
makes perfect sense. Then something is better than nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just have to try it, right? Um, um, one of the things that I have done, so this is, I guess now, for now, this digital age, this is considered very low tech, but we've used Google Docs to brainstorm. We've put uh, people into small groups and given them one Google Doc with templates on where they should be writing, right? We didn't do sticky notes, but like I said, it's basically a big paper approach that we just used Google Docs and asked people to brainstorm. And that's when I sort of noticed that people are more, it seems like sometimes it's difficult for people to actually write it when it's online. I don't know, but some people do it, some people don't. Some people wish to talk more, some people wish to use the Google Doc more. We're still trying to figure out. I cannot say I've mastered this, how to do design thinking, ideation and iteration online. I can't claim that.
I think Laura makes a great point that she likes that because Google Docs does show people looking at the document with their little cursor. And did you know this, Mega, that when you see those round circles in the top right corner with
You
the
can
photos
click.
of the other people,
Yes.
you can click on those and it takes them to where their cursor is?
Yes, yes. I only discovered this a couple of months ago.
I had a collaborator who was like, and right here we need to change this word. And I thought, how does she think
How
I'm
do you
gonna
find
get
it?
that
Yes.
fast?
I know, I know. I'm still learning new things about Google Docs every day.
Exactly. And I have used your technique where we've maybe made a table that can expand so people know where to put their stuff, or
Mhm,
everybody picks a different font or a different font color so you can
mhm.
track things. Was there anything else you're working on that you are hoping folks will keep an eye on?
Yeah, uh, so I have actually put together some of the resources that I've talked about, more sort of in the context of libraries in one of the articles that came out a couple of years ago. So I will send that out to Kristen.
That'd be
Um,
great.
but but in terms of things that I'm working on right now, that specifically is design thinking approach, using design thinking approach, is I'm actually working with the Maryland State Library Agency to create resources for library staff to work with patrons who come and use public library computers to do everyday transactions, so applying for jobs and all that. But these are more like things that they bring into the librarian and asking them to do it with all their private information on it. So how do you then leverage those moments to facilitate privacy learning? Because what I found out from my research is if you offer a privacy class in the library, nobody comes, right? But people are dealing with privacy issues. So we're trying to leverage those moments and creating some resources that library staff can use to work with patrons as well as training among themselves. So wait for it. That will come out in a couple of months. And I was also wondering, is there any favorite techniques that came out? What technique won today? Did people put it on the chat?
People really like the layered technique.
And the
And
layered elaboration, not a surprise.
I put a link to one of your colleagues' papers about that
Yes,
up
yes,
earlier in the chat.
great.
Also, speaking of privacy, if issues of data privacy are of interest to folks here, we did have a webinar with Florian Schaub in
Mhm.
November about that topic. So when you get the link to the archive, we'll include a link to the YouTube channel so that you can go back and see that. Well, with that, it's 4:58. So thank you so much, Mega. Thanks to all of you for attending, and we hope you'll help us out with the evaluation form, and have a good evening.